All right. This is Stevie, and I want to just take some time to talk about Martin Sostre, because he's someone that all of us, particularly those of us inside behind these walls, should know about. Um, we owe a large debt to him, whether we're talking about law libraries or disciplinary procedures that many of us have to we face for doing work behind the walls, or religious practices and things like that. Martin was instrumental in securing legal victories for prisoners. Um, and it's so important that he's known and his work is continued. And what I want to talk about now is a letter that he wrote in 1967, and this is after he was released from prison and he moved to Buffalo, and he opened up a bookstore. And Martin was really concerned about the youth and opened up a political center so people could be taught and learn about what needs to be done so they could change their world. And so I want to actually talk about some things that Martin wrote and then comment on them and how they impacted my work today. And one of the first things that Martin was concerned about the youth. He considered them the largest and most dynamic segment of the black community. He asked the question, what must a revolutionary do to command the allegiance of the militant black youth? And he believed he had the answer, okay? And part of it was political education, pulling them in through cultural productions, providing spaces for them to be able to study and making that easier. And this helped me. I thought about things out as far as inside the prison today, and how there is an intergenerational rift between older people and young people, and how those of us over 35 tend not to interact with those who are under 30. And so this creates a problem as far as organizing. This creates a problem as far as study. And this makes it hard for us to really progress and present a united front. And so when I look at Martin's work, I'm finding ways, things that I can adapt, things that I can adopt to be able to attract the young people and to create these connections between younger people and older people. And one of the ways I've been able to use, using Martin's strategy, is cultural production. He understood how important music was to the young people and drawing them in. Also, he always made it easy for them to learn. He provided free material, sometimes free pamphlets, books, and he provided space for them to study and ask questions. And this is something I try to do inside is facilitate study, because the harder you make it, the more they'll move away from it. But if I make it easy, so sometimes like we buy the material, we buy the notebooks and the pens and the highlighters, and we make the copies for them. And so all they do is come and sit down and discuss.
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And it's something that I learned from Martin. Also Martin talked about, he wrote about playing it by ear, and that the process of learning how to connect with the people was trial and error. And I wrote that first Martin was a noticer. I continue to remind activists and organizers that we have to come to spaces as noticers, being attentive to what is already there. Martin came to Buffalo as a stranger. He moved there upon release from prison. He knew that going into a new environment, he had to check out the scene first. Too often, activists enter new spaces revved up to teach and not to learn. This causes many mistakes and can rub people the wrong way. Also, he knew that good things take time. I once heard someone say, bad things happen quickly, good things take time, and it's true. It takes time to figure out what works, what connects with the people, and what keeps them coming back. Patience and a willingness to risk, to try various methods is needed. So I think that was really important, something I picked up from him in his work, in his letters from prison, about being willing to play it by ear, to be willing to come in and notice what's happening already. And that was important to me. It really was. He wrote, when I first opened the bookstore, it was solely a bookshop with nothing but paperbacks on Negro and African history, culture, and politics. And I wrote, Martin realized that in order to attract people, he needed to expand his offerings. He needed to diversify, and he did. When I first started study groups, I had only one type of group in mind. And because of that, I was attracting only one type of person. When I realized there were other concerns, other issues, and ways of learning, that people were interested in other things, I expanded the groups and the topics. That's when I saw exponential growth, and that's why we went from being one group to 4 groups, and it was really important that I understood that.
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And so I go back to the fact that he came in and he was noticing things and he was trying different things out, And it was always about how can I get the people in and make this easier for them. And I just think that if we, as individual activists and as a movement, think about that, how can I make it easier for people to participate in this movement, in this study group, in this event, in this action, right? However they can, whenever they can, then our movement will be much stronger. It will be much, much stronger. You know what I mean? So I think that's really important. Martin was always engaged with the people. He talked continually. He used books, pamphlets, cartoons, etc. He stayed in conversations with the people, and he made it easy for people, especially the youth, to learn. And so I think I'm always asking myself, how can I make this easier? How can I facilitate this process? And when I'm doing the work today, I stand on his shoulders, and I hope I make him proud. I hope that that I'm continuing his work. And the thing is that it was always about the people and the work for him. And I always say that one of the reasons why people don't know Martin as well as other people is because he was more of a doer than anything. It was late in the actions. He was about doing things. It wasn't about, always talking and writing, but he was about doing things. And so I hope to take his example and to pass it on in the work that I'm doing. You know what I mean? But this is a person that we all should know about. And hopefully Garrett Felber completes his book on Martin Sostre, and we get it out to the world and the people, because there's no one behind the walls who should not know who he is, because we all benefit from his work and his sacrifices. And I'm so appreciative of what he has done. So that's what I wanted to say about Martin today. Thank you.
In the midst of her own 16-month incarceration in 1971, Angela Davis wrote a petition calling for a new trial for another political prisoner, Martin Sostre. A black Puerto Rican who was framed during the 1967 rebellion in Buffalo, Sostre was then already the single most significant figure in securing the constitutional rights of incarcerated people in the 20th century. He would spend another 40 years fighting for his own freedom, as well as the liberation of all oppressed people. Yet he passed away in 2015 without a major obituary. Today we are incredibly fortunate, and I am very personally honored, to be joined by many of his former comrades who worked to free Martin from prison, and those who have been moved by their relationships with him, his ideas, his example of what it meant to lead a principled life of revolutionary struggle. I'll begin today with an overview of Sostre's life to give our viewers some context for our guests and their recollections. Martin was born in 1923 to Puerto Rican parents. His father was a merchant seaman and his mother a cap maker, and he grew up admiring the street corner orators of 125th Street and Louis Michaud's Black Nationalist bookstore on 7th Avenue. He left school in the 10th grade to help his family earn money during the Depression and was drafted into the Army in 1942 and discharged 4 years later. In 1946, he was arrested on heroin possession and sentenced to 6 to 12 years in prison. He would later call himself first a politicized prisoner before he became a political prisoner. And he became politicized during these years in part through his relationship with and mentorship by a Puerto Rican nationalist and political prisoner, Julio Pinto Gandia. He also met Teddy Anderson, a Muslim of the Ahmadiyya faith, and eventually joined the Nation of Islam, having been drawn especially to its black nationalism. He described his first incarceration as, quote, the first time I had a chance to think and began reading everything I could, history, philosophy, and law. He quickly became an accomplished jailhouse lawyer, drafting templates for an organized prison litigation movement, which would eventually usher about the first constitutional rights for incarcerated people, who had been considered since Reconstruction slaves of the state. During these years, he dedicated himself to a strict spiritual and political regimen of yoga and writ writing. He believed in, quote, marshaling spiritual and physical powers not just to strengthen myself, but to wage a more effective struggle to improve conditions around me. That struggle continued upon his release in 1964. He had served his full 12-year sentence, a third of them in solitary confinement. Martin moved to Buffalo, New York, working at Bethlehem Steel, and saved his money until he could open a radical bookstore in the Cold Springs district. He would work days at the steel mill to stock the shelves with writings of Robert F. Williams, Malcolm X, and Chairman Mao, and open the stores at night. Finally, he decided, rather than working two full-time jobs, he would take a leap of faith, quit his stable job at the steel mill and work 16-hour days at the bookstore to make it self-sufficient. Using a loudspeaker outside the shop which played records to lure in neighborhood youth, Sostre would allow people to sit and read all day, returning until they had finished a book. The bookstore also attracted some local student activists, among them Jerry Ross, who we'll hear from today shortly. During the long hot summer of 1967, amidst 159 national urban uprisings, including Buffalo, Sostre's Afro-Asian bookstore became a hotspot of activity. During the revolt itself, he would stay open until 3 a.m., providing refuge from tear gas, as well as delivering rousing speeches and political education. Long a target of local politicians and law enforcement, Sostre's bookstore was raided several weeks later, and he was charged with narcotics possession, arson, and assault. He faced a $50,000 bail and served 8 months in jail before eventually being sentenced to 30 to 41 years by an all-white jury. He left with his fist raised and told the courtroom audience to keep resisting. Over the next 8 years, most of which he was held in solitary confinement, Sostre managed to fight and win cases in the courts, established labor unions which advocated a minimum wage for prisoners, and even edited newsletters from solitary confinement. Two of his greatest legal victories were Sostre v. Otis, which mandated the right to due process in relationship to censorship of literature, and Sostre v. Rockefeller, which mandated the right to, in which Judge Constance Baker Motley awarded him $13,000 in damages, which he never could collect. She also ruled that his confinement constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Through the relentless work of dozens of defense committees led by those like Jerry Ross, Kriya Arvanatis, who we also have joining us, and especially Sharon Fisher in Buffalo, many of Martin's writings were published and his case continued to gain notoriety. During this second prison term, Sostre's political views also continued to develop. He now identified as an anarchist and valued individual principles over organizational dogmas. It was during this period that he crossed paths with Lorenzo Irvin, who we're very honored to have on this call as well, and he continued to speak out against the Vietnam War, calling himself, quote, a black Viet Cong. He was also a vocal supporter of Puerto Rican independence, and the Young Lords even established a free breakfast program in his name. The writings of radical feminists led him to conclude that, quote, the struggle for the liberation of women was the most widespread and humanistic struggle. Lastly, he rejected the prison reforms following the 1971 Attica Prison Rebellion as pacifiers to quell a larger revolution. He spent the majority of his final years in solitary confinement for refusing to shave his quarter-inch length beard and submit to rectal cavity searches. As he explained, quote, I cannot submit to injustices, even minor ones. Once one starts submitting to minor injustices and rationalizing them away, their accumulation creates a major oppression. That is how entire peoples fell into slavery. Although he suffered nearly a dozen beatings, he wrote that, quote, although they may succeed in beating me to death, they shall never succeed in forcing me to relinquish what in the final analysis are the final citadels of my personality, human dignity, and self-respect. Thanks to the work of Steve and Joe and their efforts on the film Frame Up, the state's key witness, Ardo Williams, recanted his story. He revealed that he had been hired as an informant by the narcotics squad to frame Sostre in return for dropping drug charges held against him. Despite this evidence, it would take media exposure, a broad-based social movement, nonviolent civil disobedience, and Amnesty International naming him a prisoner of conscience to finally secure his commutation from the governor on Christmas Day in 1975. When Sostre left prison, he never stopped organizing. He considered the world outside prisons to be simply minimum security, still under violent state control. One of the main lessons I learned is how much more struggle lies ahead, he said. After being invited to Passaic, New Jersey by another young college student supporter, Sandy Sheback, who we are also grateful to have on this call, he and Sandy wound up forming what would become known as JEAP, the Juvenile Education and Awareness Project, which taught teenagers construction skills alongside political education. The young people were paid a minimum wage to learn job skills and rehab old abandoned buildings, which were then turned into apartments and rented at below market price. JEAP continues to this day, providing facilities for the Angela Kids Preschool, a home for a family, and a weekend mentoring program for Black and Latinx girls. Martin passed away on August 12, 2015, at the age of 92, leaving behind his wife Liz, his son Vinny, and his sister Letitia. At the height of his international prominence, radical attorney William Kunstler remembered Sostre as, quote, a Promethean figure, a hero to other prisoners and to ourselves. He should never have even been in jail, but while he was, the state did all it could do to destroy what it could not, his indomitable will. As Martin once said, my weapon against them is my integrity. So with that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Jerry to share a little bit about his relationship with Martin. So Jerry, could you take us from your first meeting with Martin in the mid-1960s to, of course, painting a beautiful portrait of him decades later, which we hope will finally be in the Art Museum in Buffalo soon.
Eloquence and brilliance in his presentation. I was then assigned to attend every day of the trial and witnessed Sostre being chained and gagged in the courtroom. Is the audio coming through okay?
Yeah, very choppy.
So,
Not understandable.
is that better? I'm leaning a little closer to the mic. Is that better or worse? Oh, so yeah.
Touching the mic is creating a noise, I believe.
Anyway, I wrote reports for Workers' World newspaper and alerted the SDS campus, SDS on campus to what was going down during the trial. At that time, SDS and the off were conducting almost weekly anti-Vietnam War marches and picket lines. After the Buffalo 9 bust at the Unitarian Church in Buffalo, the two causes became intertwined, and 3 Martin Sostre banners were added to stop the war, ones that were carried by protesters. Committee work consisted in publishing newsletters, pamphlets, and continuing the bookstore in exile on campus.
Thank you, Jerry. I think, Cree, if you want to share, Jerry mentioned these defense committees, and you were a part of the defense committee in Tucson, I believe, along with Jerry. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you came to this work and what the daily work of the defense committees was like.
Okay, can you hear me?
Much better.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot better.
Okay. Okay, so I was just starting to give you a little bit of background on how I came to be involved in the Sostre defense. I was not all that long out of high school, and I had been very involved in anti-war. I ran an underground newspaper for a high school SDS group, and I had been involved with the SRAF's Social Revolutionary Anarchist Federation. And that's when I met Jerry. And I don't remember, I asked Jerry what year he came down to Tucson, but somehow I met Jerry, and that's where I found out about Martin Sostre. And it just struck me as a really important issue, and I wanted to help out with the defense. So we basically just did flyering, and we communicated with Martin whenever we could. I wrote a couple letters back and forth with Martin, and just to fill him in on what we were doing. But I actually really don't have as much background and information to contribute as Jerry did, so I'm going to keep this really short. At one point, I decided, because that was the late 60s, early 70s, what the heck, let's hitchhike to New York and go visit Martin in prison. So I did that, and at that time I met Joel and Steve briefly. And I just have to say that the meeting with Martin was really kind of a pivotal thing for me in terms of just developing more commitment. I was really inspired by him. He was very kind. I talked to him for about a half an hour. And then I just went back and I did more defense work for a while. I'm not really sure what else I have to contribute about this, except, I also was a member of Amnesty and was involved in, petitions and letters and very grassrootsy kind of work. And later on, I moved to Eugene, and then Jerry was there again. So we've been friends for a long time. Martin was a really pivotal person in my political development at the time, and he was not the only thing I was involved in. I was also doing some support work for American Indian movement, and after the war was ending, just being involved in anarchist political groups, which might not have been the best thing for me at the time. A lot of squabbling. And anyway, I did try to find Martin online in the before he passed away, but I was not able to connect with him. But he has been really maintained an important part of my life and my beliefs and my political development.
Thanks, Dree. So actually, I think we'll go to Lorenzo next, because Lorenzo, I believe you would have met Martin in 1969, 1970. So if you could talk a little bit about, your connection with Martin.
So I met Martin in September 1969. I was being brought back from Germany. I had been on the run for hijacking a plane from Atlanta, Georgia to Cuba. And so it took them about 9 months to catch me. And so when they did catch up with me, they brought me back to the Federal Detention Center in New York City. Meeting him was quite a joke, actually. I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about his case. I was out of the country at that period of time when a lot of the publicity came out about him filing suit against the prison officials in New York State, I'm sorry. Now, I had been an activist for 3 years. I'd been in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, later the Black Panther Party for a brief period. And then, so I had already been an activist. I used to sell the Black Panther newspaper. I used to organize anti-draft resistance campaigns among black activists or young black people in the South. And so I'd already been doing things. But when I met him, I didn't have any firm, political ideology. I just was an activist, that's all. And I was able to talk to him after he came to New York for the New York City for the trial in the various civil suits he had filed against the prison officials. And we used to meet. The first time we met, I told him what my situation was. I was facing actually the death penalty. At that time, aircraft piracy was a sentence. You could be sentenced to death. And so I started talking to him first about, what he knew legally about a case like mine. Then we started talking about, political beliefs and political activism and so forth. And he's a wealth of knowledge, first of all. He's been well read about a lot of political activism and political ideology. I guess that came from, being in prison and having the ability to read books and so forth, underground books. We distribute books. Prisoners would distribute books all over the prison underground whenever they got a book in. So he was able to explain to me about anarchism, the tenets of anarchism, which I never had anyone do before. And so we were meeting every day talking about, political issues and talking about my criminal case and so forth and so on. And it might not last any more than an hour a day, but it was invaluable to me, first of all, to meet someone who was in prison, serving life in prison, had served life in prison, and was on another sentence and so forth. And I actually, although I'd been an activist, I had no history of, being arrested or in prison. Well, arrested, yes, but not imprisoned, and certainly for a long period of time like that. When you face life in prison or the death penalty, you need someone to explain to you what you're going to encounter. You need someone who can steel you against what the racist officials are going to do. And you need someone to tell you in plain terms how they have managed to survive. And so it was extremely important to me just to get that. But it was much more than that because, as I said, every day was political education, and it broadened my intellect. So that by the time I did leave Martin, after the period of me fighting extradition to Georgia, when I was forced to leave, then when I did go to prison, I was able to survive and deal with whatever maltreatment I received, and I received a considerable amount. I was given 2 life sentences by an all-white jury in Georgia, given 2 life sentences and with no possibility of parole. And because I was in a position to draw upon what Martin had told me, I was able to stand tall. I was also able to build my own defense organization, which I model after his organization, which it's just amazing to me to meet some of the people who ran that defense organization. But it allowed me to then myself use some of the tactics he used in terms of building a broad-based movement of all ages, races, political beliefs, and so on, and also to how to put pressure on the authorities with your movement. And that information that came from Martin's defense organization, as well as me following him as well as I could in radical mass media, allowed me to myself put pressure on the federal government. I was in federal prison, but it allowed me to put pressure on the federal government so that after a period of time, I think 12 years, I was able to start really making some serious inroads in terms of getting out. And, I built an international organization, or at least a Free Lorenzo movement, which was made up of the Anarchist Black Cross, which had rebuilt by that time, a group in Holland called Help a Prisoner Oppose Torture Committee and others. So the meeting with Martin and Martin's, his demeanor, to me, he was like a teacher. And he looked like a teacher, a very firm and tough teacher. But he would give you information almost with staccato facts. Bam, 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 here it is. Here's the truth. And knock down every lie you've ever heard in your life. He was a very dynamic individual. I always thought that, if I'd stayed longer with him, who knows what we could have accomplished. But as it stood, he made me be able to weather the storm of all those years in prison, of the maltreatment, beatings, and torture, and solitary confinement. I was in solitary confinement about 9 years. And, so he made it possible for me. He gave me an example of a revolutionary in the prison system. And I've always carried that throughout my life, actually, So he's the individual that touched me deeper as a mentor than anyone I can think of. So I'm indebted to him. And it's a period now where I look on my life now, and even to this very day, I think like him in a lot of ways. I think like him in a lot of ways, critical thinking, looking at the depth of issues, looking at the core of what you're confronted with, and then being able to analyze it, critically analyze it and put it out there. That comes from Martin Sostre. He may not have been a writer, but he certainly was a fierce intellect, a fierce intellectual. And to this day, like I said, I draw so much from him. It shaped my character in many ways.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I think we'll move to Steve. We're sort of moving chronologically here. So Steve and Joel were the co-directors of Frame Up, and this film, if you could talk a little bit about how it came to be and your production of it, and with where it kind of sits within your own work. And maybe we'll start. I know you can't talk at the same time, but feel free to interrupt each other. Steve, why don't you start?
Well, I'll start off because Joe and I were discussing this earlier. I mean, first off, let me just say it is ironic that Joe and I have been involved for years with the anarchist movement and have done 2 long-form docs, Free Voice of Labor and Anarchism in America, about anarchism. So this is something that's pretty close to us. But when we began the film about Sostre, we didn't know, I don't believe, that he was an anarchist. We were presented with the case as a case of injustice of him being a political prisoner. And this was early in our filmmaking career. The film I think we had made before that was Red Squad, which was about intelligence gathering in New York City by the police and by the FBI, and we became plaintiffs in Hampshire versus Special Services, which was maybe the longest class action suit in New York State history. In any case, we were a little bit up in the air on how we first found out about the case, but I believe it was Paul Chevigny, who was an attorney in New York City, who told us, sort of put us in touch with Herman Schwartz. Herman Schwartz was a law professor and lawyer and ACLU activist in Buffalo, and he was looking to find someone to, help with Sostre's defense. And he told us about the case, and we were inspired by it, and we decided to make the film, and we did. Joe, you want to pick up at all?
Yeah. Well, my memory, for some reason, I guess because we're older, is somewhat different. I kind of remember Frank Donner having told us about the case. Now, Frank Donner was kind of, really this towering, legendary labor lawyer. Used to be associated with UE in the old days. He had been our mentor when we did Red Squad, because he had done the classic works on how surveillance has impacted the labor movement. So I just have a memory that it was Frank who had mentioned Sostre's case. And as Steve said, one thing led to another. I don't even remember how we even raised the money to go up to Buffalo to begin shooting. But as Steve said, we had no idea about the anarchist connection. It's really only lately that we've been fully apprised of how deep it went. And as Steve said, we had come out of the anarchist movement, and we were involved in an anarchist group called Transcendental Students in the late 60s, early 70s. And then after we departed film school, we were involved in other anarchist films. But, the Sostre film, and having met Sostre, was really special. I mean, the best scene, my best memory of Sostre in that film, and we didn't film it, was when he debated the prison warden. He blew that guy away. And it was so typical of Martin's sensibilities, which are kind of enduring to this day, because I still consider myself an anarchist. I still support Antifa. And I think that it all kind of stems from, to some degree, from Martin. I think he was really a luminary when it came to spreading that kind of consciousness. And that's apart from what he did in terms of the law and being a jailhouse lawyer.
I mean, he was one of the things that I was thinking about that film, because Joe and I were pretty young. We were maybe 22 or 23 years old when we started making the film, and I think the person who, and I just wanted to make 2 points. One, we worked really closely with Sharon Fisher and got to be very friendly with her, and she was an amazing resource. I mean, she worked 24/7 on Martin's defense for years, and she was just incredible. I'm sorry she's not here, but I'm still somewhat in touch with her. I know she doesn't have a computer, she doesn't do email, so that's Sharon. But the other thing is that we were sort of these young filmmakers, so when we went to Buffalo to cover some of the story, I think sort of one of my best memories, other than the interviews in jail with Martin, was Sheriff D'Amico, because he was the guy who really hated Sostre, and I think engineered the whole setup with Arthur Williams to frame him for the 10 or 15 grams of heroin, which supposedly he sold to Arthur Williams. In fact, I was just looking on my desk. I have this thing that he gave us. I've kept it all these years. I don't know if you can see it. Sheriff D'Amico's drink drive calculator. So we went in there. Our attitude was not confrontational. So his attitude was, here are these young guys. I'm going to teach them what's right. And he showed us the D'Amico drug mobile. I mean, he tried to woo us to see the case from his point of view. And I think that was effective in helping us get an interview with him, and and that worked well within the film. But I think it's also important to say, I think the film was part of the movement to help free Sostre, but one of the, we should really thank Gil Noble, who had the host of that ABC show, Like It Is, who broadcast our film, and that really did help generate publicity about Martin's case.
Yeah, that was early on. That was important. And I remember after what's his name, Arthur Williams, agreed to recant his testimony, I remember I flew up to Buffalo to testify at the court hearing. I mean, it didn't free him. I think it was Hugh Carey, then governor,
yes,
executive clemency. But I tell you the truth, I didn't really, given the way the justice system was set up and is set up to this day, I really didn't expect anything to come of that recanting the testimony, because I think that the cards were stacked against Sostre, and I think that's a problem with the legal system. I mean,
well, the courts don't like recantations because the argument is, how do we know you're telling the truth now and you weren't, versus then? So, I'm not taking that position, but I think that it was the hearing for a new trial was a long shot. But, of course, it was worth taking, considering the man was in jail.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I want to bring in Sandy here, because I think actually, Sandy, you might have known Martin the latest and the longest of any of the folks here. So just take us through when you got introduced to Martin's case, which I presume was around this era of getting him free, and then through the 80s and onward.
A little bit later. Several months after Attica exploded, I'm from Jersey, as you know, and Rahway State Prison had their revolt in November. It was a Thanksgiving weekend. As a result of, they handled it quite differently, I think, because of Attica. The Governor Cahill got there immediately. Nobody got killed. And one of the inmates' requests that was approved was that they would have a inmate council to advocate for prison reform and increasing funds for educational programs. So getting to the point, I was a student at the time. I did some amateur boxing, and one of my boxing instructors got sent to prison. And he invited me, he informed me that there was a group of professors from around the state of New Jersey and students that were going into Rahway Prison to sit down with the inmates and formulate strategies to advocate for prison reform. The head of that inmate council was Samuel J. Williams. He was a very charismatic figure. He was close to about 50 years old. And he had the respect of politicians, of professors. And I finally asked him, I said, I know you got to know each other. I said, how'd you get all this knowledge? He says, well, when I was in New York state prison system, I did a lot of time with Martin Sostre, and he politicized me. So that's really how I got to know the case. And then there was the George Merritt case here in Jersey, and I got involved with the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And when Martin got out, I was at a demonstration in Philadelphia, and someone gave me a flyer informing people that Martin would be speaking at a church in Greenwich Village. So I went to hear him. And afterwards, I shook his hand and I said, I'm a good friend of Sam Williams. He said, oh, hey, we did a lot of time together, this and that. And I said, listen, could you send me some of your posters? Because I don't know where to get them. He says, yeah, I'll send you the posters. So send me the posters. I had his return address. And about 3 years later, I started working after I graduated college, I started working with kids in Passaic, New Jersey, a small urban center. And I got in touch with him, and I had him do a series of speaking engagements over several years. So after one speaking engagement, we're riding through the city of Passaic, and he's looking out the car, and he says, "Pull over, Sam. Pull over right now. You could just pull over. Pull over." And he gets out, and we're looking at a vacant building. And we couldn't see, like, too much into the building. He says, "This is important." He says, "Do you know anything about this building?" I said, "It's vacant." He says, "Well, I know that." He says, "But, you got to do some research." Now, I told him that I knew one of my skills was putting grants together, doing research and leveling down foundations. So I always say, make a long story short, I found out this was a city-owned building. We got the key for the building from the city engineer so we could look at it because it was coming up for auction. We went into the building. It was the winter. I don't know anything about construction. Martin knew a lot about it. The floor was a clothing store. The floor was covered with ice and snow. And I said, "Well, this is it." And I started walking out. And he says, "Yeah, man, this is it. You're right. This is it." No. This is it. I said, nobody's going to give it. He says, "You don't see what I see." I said, "I see the sky." He says, No. He says, "We could renovate this building. Even if we don't have the money right now, we'll start it, we'll renovate it, we'll make this a community center. We're going to start changing people's lives." So I started putting work together. Martin and I got in touch with Reverend Ben Chavis of the Wilmington 10, who was released then. He was head of the Commission for Racial Justice. We got in touch with Lucius Walker of the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, and they kind of guided us towards foundations that were likely to support us. Now, keep in mind, that's around 1981, and everyone was going to foundations because Reagan eliminated all the government sources. It took us about a year and a half, and we got about 6 or 7 foundations to individually come together. We purchased the building. We were able to get funds for kids on after school and weekends, and we renovated the building, Market Street in Passaic. And it became our community center. And Martin had his little books over there, and we were having programs for the kids. We had Anderson Lee, who was on our board of directors, actually had a air conditioning and refrigeration workshop. And this wasn't just something like half stepping. Use another word, half-stepping. This was a air conditioning and refrigeration program that was certified by the Department of Education, so people can get a certificate and actually go on and earn a living off it. And that's what happened. About that time, I had went to Nicaragua, came back, and I did some linkages with Peaceworks, and a lot of the refrigerators and air conditioners found their way to Sandinista communities in Nicaragua. So me being a little bit younger, and I said, this is going to be a great idea. Let me tell the newspapers about this when we load it up next time, okay? So we had a reporter that came down from the local newspaper, and his name is Mike Faby. I'll never forget him. And he took a look at the posters that we had up, one of being Martin's, one of being Angela Davis's, one being the Soledad brothers, and he wrote a story on us that was front page that was intended to slam dunk us. It was called Lessons of the Trade, Youth Program Under Fire. We are politicizing youths into radicalism. And I was pretty worried about it. Martin didn't care. He was like, just keep doing what we're doing. I don't care. I said, how could you not care? We could, all kinds of problems could happen because of this with funding and this and that. He said, don't worry about it. And 2 days later, a rival newspaper came down and really did an accurate story, which showed that we were actually, helping kids, helping the community. And yeah, we sent refrigerators to Nicaragua, but it blew over. It blew over pretty quick. But the legacy is there. Today, that building houses the Angela Kids Preschool. On weekends, that's under Angela Burgos Oliver, and on weekends, the Bella Chanel Mentoring Program that was founded and directed by Kim Cottrell, as Garrett said, is a resource where it's a mentoring program from girls, and we have, just like before with Martin. When Martin reached out to the college community, we have college students coming down, helping out with the mentoring. So I consider that, that is the legacy of Martin, that it's, I don't know what would have happened to that building and other buildings that we renovated. That, and Martin always said, it's about creating tangible results. His reputation was he would leave that building like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. They called him Night Train because kids would see him leaving. Hey man, did you see Martin was working there like 1 o'clock in the morning? And to them, this was was a foreign concept. Like when you leave work, and that's it. And Martin had to tell them, listen, when you leave work, you put the hammers away, you put the tools away. So he was giving them real life lessons. And, those young people are now adults today, and I see them, and they often reflect upon the lessons that they learned from Martin. Some of them are, one fellow is a vice principal of a high school and an activist. Some of those kids are activists, and so that's his legacy. That's his living legacy.
Thanks, Sandy. I think with our remaining time, actually, since you bring that up, we just can go around and talk about that legacy, either to yourself or in your own work. Because obviously, for a lot of you, the last contact you had with Martin was in the 70s. So just a go-around reflection of how he impacted your work. Lorenzo touched on this a little bit earlier, so why don't we start with you, Lorenzo?
Well, I think that I became an anarchist because of Martin Sostre, to put it quite bluntly, and I've been an anarchist for over 50 years now. But his fervor for radical social change and his ability to articulate, whether it's one-on-one or groups or whatever, but just his ability to do that made him a very valued organizer, trainer. He explained to me the difference, with the organizer, trainer concept. But after a certain stage, you've been in various movements and so forth and so on. You get older and you then become a trainer. You be able to train other people to do the kind of work that you did or concepts that you raise up, as a theory. And to me, everything I learned, about anarchism, in at least the early phases of it before I started reading for myself and so on, everything came from Martin Sostre, came from just discussions with him at that prison in New York. That brief period of time I was there, and so it was important to me that I got a chance to see and talk to him, but also a chance to really understand where he was coming from with his ideas. And of course, I can think, of course, for myself, but the point is, you meet someone, they become a mentor to you. They become someone that has lasting value for you. And so that was my thing with Martin. I had been an activist for years already, and it's not like I didn't know anything about activism, but the focus he had and the focus he gave me in terms of political theory, political understanding, and also a new radical concept. That was a new radical concept to me, anarchism, at that time. And some of the anarchist communism and so forth. I'd never heard of these terms, didn't know what they meant. He took the time to explain all this stuff to me. And that began my whole focus and my whole reading and campaigns for political education inside the prisons that I was a part of, and I was locked up 15 years, so I was able to reach quite a few young brothers and sisters and so forth. And, in part, whatever wisdom I got, I had accumulated myself, but it all comes from Martin Sostre.
Yeah, thanks, Lorenzo. And also, I should say, Lorenzo put together this great zine on Martin and the influence that Martin had on him. And then Stevie Wilson, who's an incarcerated comrade who I'm in touch with, when I mentioned Martin, he said, "Oh, and I know about Martin from Lorenzo's zine." So I appreciate you kind of, putting that legacy forward too, and keeping that consciousness, because Stevie and I talk a lot about why Martin's not as well known and remembered. Yeah, Steve and Joel, do you want to weigh in a bit?
Well, I would say that, doing the film, first off, you couldn't help but be inspired by Martin, because, it was clear that the prison system was not going to beat him down. He was just not going to let it happen. So as an individual, he was inspirational. But I think it was really, I feel like the fact that we got involved, we made this film, and we saw that the movement to free Sostre was successful, that was also inspirational, that you can sometimes make real political change. And when he got out of jail, we just thought that was a great victory.
Yeah, also I think that, like Lorenzo said, in terms of the anarchist connection, I think, which we really didn't know about to any great degree then, I think now it becomes more inspirational because we're still working in that realm, and we're still producing media that deals with the movement, both historically, and there's obviously, it's a very colorful history, and at present, and what Antifa represents, anti-fascism essentially is what I've always believed to be the typical way to proceed as an activist, and I still do. And my kids, were raised with that. Now they're both in their 20s. But I think he was inspirational. He should be better known. But I think that, everything is timing, and I think we're in a situation today where everything's falling apart. People are kind of looking for revelations, and I think that Martin Sostre is part of that whole uncovering, revealing of the past and its relevance.
Yeah, thanks. Cree, do you have any last thoughts?
Well, my last thoughts are, what am I going to do with this, this inspiration and knowledge in the future? And I don't, as being almost 70, I don't know how much longer I have to effectuate change or to work on change. And I'd like to see how this inspiration that Martin inspired in all of us takes us forward and gives us more thought about what we're going to do in the future. And I've been thinking for a while about dealing with things like the private prisons that have sprung up, and the prison system has gotten more and more complex and more repressive and more racist, as time has gone by, and that's something to think about, how to counter that. It's and I'm also thinking about Abdullah Öcalan, and he's another inspirational person that is dealing with very serious, similar and worse situations even than Martin in Turkey these days. So I don't know. I just feel like there's seeds that Martin planted that are kind of firing off in my brain right now, and I'd like to see everyone who was inspired by Martin move forward, and I guess that's about all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Jerry, how about you?
Martin was a real life changer for me, because when I was a Marxist, I was a member of the Off and Workers' World Party, and I got so influenced by Martin that I was put on show trial and expelled from Workers' World for Trotskyism, which means forming a faction within the party against the leadership. And my faction was Martin. And another thing is that when I was in high school, I started studying Kung Fu. And in college, I studied Tai Chi. And when I met Cree, I had moved to Tucson in the early 70s and was teaching Tai Chi Chuan in the public parks. And I had always remembered that Martin had talked to me about mixing spirituality with politics, with anarchist politics. And what he meant by that is that, most Marxists put down religion, but Martin was an independent thinker, and he saw the value of spirituality and religion if put to the use for the movement, for the cause. And I never forgot that. So that became a big part of my life. I still teach Tai Chi, and I still practice it. And that, I'm sure, thinking of those nights in solitary confinement when Martin was in Green Haven Penitentiary without a blanket on a metal mattress in the middle of New York winter, he channeled tumo energy or heat into his body to preserve himself. So many of these things are just mind-blowing. And, another thing, the last thought, Martin, in his writing, would speak of the police, this is very current now, racist pig cops. He would use an expression like that. Unlike a liberal would say, oh, there's just a few bad apples. No, to Martin, he always spoke in terms of ideology and institutionally, analyzing institutionally what the cops represented. So when he said racist pig cops, it was very precise, very analytical. And unlike the liberal community that likes to just say it's a few bad apples, he knew it needed institutional change. So when you
even more so now.
What's that, Green?
And even more so now.
More so now, and we need more real revolutionaries like Martin that can keep this vision alive.
Thanks, Jerry. Sandy, circle back to you. Anything you want to add at the end?
Martin was a role model of activism in the going beyond just protests to doing the hard lifting, the hard labor of renovating buildings, creating spaces for people to live decently, showing that community empowerment is possible with the right resources, with the right intellect, and showing young people that you don't have to accept things the way they are. He related to the kids. He challenged the kids. Well, you look around, this is not natural. It should not be this way. Kids started looking and saying, a lot of people started looking and saying, like this, I'm looking at the world in a different way. And more than just looking at it, it was about educating yourself and organizing and creating projects that produce tangible change. As Martin said, going to a demonstration is one part of it, but it's the day-to-day work that, as he said, the hard lifting. And I'm just so proud that that legacy lives on, and it's important. It's important.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm just absolutely over the moon to spend time with you all and also get you all in one box. Not one place, because we can't do that, but in one series of squares. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett, for picking us.
Yeah, I appreciate you bearing with all of our technology, and I'll be in touch.
Record something for an event for Martin Sostre. It's going to be happening on October the 10th, 2020. I intend to send something in writing, but I wanted to actually talk about Martin and his legacy, the impact of his work, and how pleased I am now that people are actually beginning to recognize what he's done and his sacrifices and the work that he put in for so many of us. I always talk about how study is important, that we learn our who, and what, and whys, and hows. And it's something that Martin was very, very, very big on. Always studying and producing literature, newsletters, pamphlets. He was really big on this, and so I hope to extend that legacy of that type of work inside. But it's amazing because it wasn't until last year that I learned about him at all. And that's the way there was a zine from Trudy Press that Lorenzo Irwin had done about him, and I was just astounded when I learned about Martin Sostre because I never heard about him before. And to know that as a prisoner, as someone like him to thank for all the legal rights that we have, whether we're talking about censorship or we're talking about free exercise of religion, whether we're talking about being able to have radical left-wing books, because if it weren't for Martin, probably 90% of my library would be confiscated. Due process through solitary confinement, freedom from cruel unusual punishment, just many different things he did. And
this is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And what's crazy is that inside, we weren't really aware of him. And it's kind of sad because every time we go to the law library, every time we practice our faith, if you're Muslim or you're Buddhist or you're Jewish, whatever, you have Martin to thank for laying the groundwork for us and being able to do that. But most of us didn't know his name, so I'm really pleased that Garrett Felber is doing a biography. I'm pleased that people are beginning to recognize his work and what he did and pay homage and respect to his work. And I asked a couple of people, last couple weeks I've been asking people, why do we think people didn't know about him? Because he lived a long time, and why people didn't know who he was, both inside and outside the prison. And as I read his work, and I read his letters from jail, I read some of his essays he gave to other people or wrote for other publications. And what I noticed about him was that he was actually a doer. Martin was a person who was about action. And so he never had a lot of deeds, but few words. He didn't write books and things like that, but he actually did a lot of things. And so it's really important to understand that sometimes that's the legacy he left, the legacy of action. And when I think about some of the things he did, like neutralizing solitary confinement for prisons by taking it over, and forcing the administration to kick people out of the hole because we didn't want to leave. It was a place we came to study and we came to show solidarity with one another. So he really kind of took the solitary confinement out of the hands of the prison officials, and that was just amazing. If we had some Martins today, things would be different inside. We have many Martins today. But that's what he wanted to...
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Fayette. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
I really want to say how much he impressed me, and I was thinking about how his bookstore, the Afro-Asian bookstore, and how he attracted the young people, how that was important for him to understand the link between cultural productions and attracting the young people, and how he made the literature available to them, and how he used Malcolm X as a segue to other people. And what he said, he thought that Malcolm spoke their language. They could understand Malcolm. So he gave them the pamphlets. It was cheap, but they were free. He was copying them, giving them to the young people. And from understanding Malcolm, they were able to understand Mao and other people. And so he left actually a pattern for me as someone inside this organizing and dealing with a lot of young people in here. He left a pattern for me in understanding how to connect with young people here through cultural productions, how to produce literature for them that speaks to them at their level, and then gradually bringing them to other materials that may be a little more dense. And so Martin actually made a role model for me as far as dealing, as an older person, dealing with younger people inside and bringing them to this knowledge and information. And it was always so important for him. The other thing I like about him is that it was never about him. It was never about him. It was about the work. And at one point when he was locked up, he talked about, if he was locked away for 40, he had to do all 40 years, that it would be worth it if he knew that he had changed some people out in the world, that he had given them some information that helped them change the world, themselves in the world. And so he made it, about other than himself all the time. And so for me, someone inside who's doing this type of work, he stands as an example of a selfless leader who was about results and actions, about trying to figure out how to bring this information, this knowledge to people, because studying is so important. I know what it did for me. I know that it healed me. I know that it gave me a sense of direction and purpose. It helped me to understand how I got where I was at, how I can get out of this situation, help others get out also. And I think that's important. That's what Martin wanted. So I'm really pleased that they have this event. And like I said, I will send a written statement. But I wanted to say something, and I want to thank his family. And I want to thank the people who are putting, I think Frame Up is going to be shown on the 10th, so I'm pleased they're showing that again. And it's time we really spread his legacy and his work to people inside and outside, that people understand who he was and we learn from his work. So I thank everyone involved in the project, and I hope to stay connected with you, you know what I mean, and aid to that, and aid with it. So thank you so much.